Welcome to David's Ships. In this video I continue with the construction of the 1 in 350 scale Schwerer Gustav kit. To watch other videos in this build series, follow the link to the playlist in the cards above. Today I'll complete the construction of the photo-etch parts for the gun itself. This will involve installing the shell trolleys and their shells, attaching the elevator ropes to the top of the elevator shaft, and installing the hand railing on the carriers. To start, I'll glue down the shell trolleys. The shell trolleys are placed on tracks that are etched into the gun handling platform. I suppose that means there's a vehicle on tracks on a vehicle on tracks. It gives you an idea of just how big this weapon really was. Anyways, the installation is simple. I pick up a trolley and place drops of extra thick superglue at the bottom of each of the wheels, and then place the trolley back onto the tracks. There isn't a very big surface area for the glue to make the bond, so this is always going to be a somewhat delicate part of the model. Fortunately, there isn't much of a need to handle them, so they should be fine. As for their position, I think they can be positioned pretty much anywhere. I have decided that I'm going to position them slightly out of alignment with each other. I don't want them to be perfectly aligned to each other, because I think that might mean we enter the uncanny valley. At this point, a lot of photo-etch has been installed, so I think it's now time to do a second round of painting, just to get everything down to the same color. On this entire structure, as you see it before you now, there are only 2 different colors that need to be applied. Well, technically 3, but only 2 for now. And that is the silver for the exposed parts of the gun barrel, and then German gray for everything else. Since the barrel is already correctly painted, I'll tape off the silver areas on the gun barrel, and then proceed to spray the entire model in Tamiya XF63 German gray. Since I'm only masking off the silver bands on the gun barrel to protect them from overspray, there's no need for me to be precise with the masking tape. That's why it's being put on in a rather rough fashion, and I'm putting it on quite loosely because I don't want to damage this paint at all. There's no varnish on it at this point, so the surface is still quite weak. While handling the model, I damaged the paint near the muzzle of the gun, so I've prepared that for new paint to be applied, just sanded it down and made the paint nice and smooth such that I can repaint that area and have it blended in nicely. While the paint is loaded into the airbrush, I'll also paint the last few photo etch parts that are going to be installed on the carriers. These are the handrails and 2 small hook-like structures that go on the front 2 carriers. I'm painting these parts on the sprues before installing them on the model, because if I were to install them on the model unpainted, then I need to mask off the brown planking at the front of the carriers. This way, I won't need to worry about masking off those areas. I can just install the parts and then do a little bit of touch-up. After giving the paint a few minutes to dry, the model can be handled, and I remove the masking tape that was covering up the silver bands on the barrel. Before moving on to connect the top of the elevator ropes to the top of the elevator shaft, I noticed that a portion of the hand railing at the front of the structure had been damaged, so I'll quickly repair that before moving on. In this case, I removed that section of railing in its entirety, and then reapplied extra thick superglue to the supports, and then glued it back into place. This model is very small, and there are little bits of detail everywhere. It's very hard to find a good place to hold it. So this keeps on happening. I keep on accidentally breaking off bits here and there. It is a bit frustrating, but it is what it is. To attach the top of the elevator ropes to the top of the elevator shaft, I cut out roughly 2mm tall blocks of photo etch. This I just cut off of the sprue from a location where it wasn't being used, just to get a simple rectangle. The rectangle of photo etch is then stuck to the top of the lift shaft in its center, and then the ropes are glued to the side of the rectangle. It's not ideal. I later noticed that if I had not installed the resin motor first, there were actually little holes in the top of the lift shaft that I could have pushed the cabling through, and then I could have cut the top of the cables off from above the lift shaft. But because I didn't do it in that order, that option was not available to me. So while this is not an ideal solution, it's the solution that I'm left with. But because these rectangles of photo etch are going to go underneath the platform at the top of the lift shaft, I don't think it's really going to matter, because it's going to be difficult to see them if they are seen at all. This is another one of those very few cases where following the instructions in the order in which the manual suggests would have actually been the correct thing to do. I'm just so used to looking at manuals for building models and doing them out of order, because the order in which the steps are given in the model just makes no sense. Most of the time it works well for me, but in this case it was a mistake. I glue the rectangles in place first using extra thick superglue, and then I position the cables on the side of the rectangle and glue them down with extra thin superglue. And now to complete the carriers. The front two carriers have this small hook-like structure. I'm not sure what it is, but whatever it is, it needs to be bent over on itself. To ensure that each of the sides stay together, I then apply extra thin superglue to the edge to bond them together. I then move on to preparing the handrails. I need to prepare 4 handrails, one for each of the cars, and these handrails need to be symmetrical for each end. Essentially, I need to bend 2 of each type in the same way, and they need to be bent as mirror images to each other. In this case, the kit manufacturer has decided to provide us with the easier type of hand railing. That is the type of hand railing that has a single rung that runs along the entire length of the bottom of the rail. This means I don't have to try and individually glue posts down. I just need to glue down a long section of rail. Since this hand railing is very similar to all the other hand railing on the model, especially the sloping ones, I don't really understand why this one gets to have a single rung. Maybe it's because there are these sections with openings and they decided that they would be kind and provide an easier guide for exactly where they should be positioned. Personally, I would have preferred it if all of the hand railings were done in this style. It makes positioning things a lot easier, and it also makes it a lot easier to glue down the hand railing. After folding all of the handrails to ensure that they're all in the correct shape for the carriages that they're going to be placed on, I then proceed to glue them down. To glue them down, I place extra thick superglue on one of the sides of the rail and then place it onto the model. That then gives me time to position it to ensure that it is correctly aligned with the corners and the staircases. I then apply extra thin superglue to the rail to securely bond it in place. With one edge of the rail securely bonded to the carrier, I then move on to the longer edge. I follow a similar process. First I position the rail, this time dry, and then once I have it in the correct position, I apply extra thin superglue to the railing to bond it in place. I then work my way down the length of the rail, applying extra thin superglue, until the rail is bonded over its full length. This process is then repeated 3 more times. The last piece of photo etch to be installed in these carriers are these hooks. They got a bit scuffed during folding, so before installation I touched them up with paint on a brush. After giving the paint a few minutes to dry, they can then be installed in the model. They need to be installed roughly in the middle of this platform. To do that, I place a small drop of extra thick superglue onto the base of the part, and then I place it onto the model in the center of the planking. The only thing to be careful of here is to install it onto the correct carriers. That would be the carriers that go at the front of the gun, and those can be quite easily identified by looking at the carriers that have the boxes on the upper platform. After installing the hand railing on the carriers, the paint on the carrier and the hand railing is a bit scuffed, so I'm just going to give that a quick touch up with the airbrush. Until I spray these parts with the varnish, the paint is going to be very delicate. The last thing to do for the gun section of this model is to paint the shells. Once again, the color which I'm supposed to use is unknown to me. This kit did not have any color guides coming with it, so I just have to guess. Online I did find a picture of one of these shells in a museum, so a modern picture with modern color, and from what I could tell, this is pretty much the closest color to what it actually looked like. So I used that as the reference for choosing the color. The closest color that I could find to it in my collection of paints was Tamiya XF12 JN Grey. Whether that's right or not, I have no idea, but it's the best that I could do with the information that I had available to me. After giving the grey paint on the shells some time to dry, I can mask off their base. At the base of the shell there are lines that indicate the area that needs to be painted in black. I use these lines as a guide to indicate the location where I should mask off the rest of the shell. I then spray the base of the shells in black. When removing the masking tape, I notice that there is a bit of overspray from the black, but I'm not going to bother to correct that. All I'm going to do is make that the bottom of the shell and hide it in the shell tray. I then proceed to glue the shells onto the model. To do this, I place a fairly large drop of extra thick superglue into the tray, and then drop the shell into the tray. Now that the elevator ropes are securely glued in place, I can paint them. This is one of the very few other places on this model that isn't painted in grey. In this case, I paint them in black using a fine paintbrush. With that, we come to the end of this video. In the next video, I'll build the base for this model and prepare it for the application of decals. If you would like to support this channel or see how this model looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.